Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 13 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-104 Microsoft Azure Administrator exam. Test your knowledge with exam-focused questions covering key Azure administration concepts. Choose your answer before the timer ends, then review the correct answer, clear explanation, and practical exam tip. Let us begin part 13. The next item is question number 520. The topic here is storage network access. Review the situation. You manage an Azure storage account named Media Assets. You are enforcing identity-based access via Microsoft Entra ID. A team of content creators belongs to a Microsoft Entra group named Content Editors. You need to assign the appropriate Azure RBAC roles to this group so they can navigate to the Media Assets storage account in the Azure portal and upload blob files. The solution must strictly follow the principle of least privilege. Which two Azure RBAC roles should you assign to the Content Editors group? Select two answers that satisfy the requirement. The options are: Option A, Storage Blob Data Reader. Option B, Storage Blob Data Contributor. Option C, Reader. Option D, Storage Account Contributor. Option E, Contributor. The correct answers are Option B, Storage Blob Data Contributor, and Option C, Reader. The key reason is to upload files using Microsoft Entra ID credentials. The Storage Blob Data Contributor role is required because it grants the necessary data plane permissions to read, write, and delete Azure storage containers and blobs. However, to navigate to and discover the storage account within the Azure Portal UI, the user also needs an Azure Resource Manager, control plane, role. The Reader role provides this minimal access, allowing the user to view the storage account resource without granting permission to alter its configuration or access its storage account keys. A. Storage Blob Data Reader only allows downloading and viewing blob data. It does not grant permissions to upload or overwrite files. D. Storage Account Contributor is a control plane role that allows management of the storage account itself, including regenerating access keys, which violates the principle of least privilege. E. Contributor grants full control plane access over the resource, which is far more privilege than necessary just to navigate the portal and upload files. The key takeaway is when users interact with Azure storage data via the Azure portal using Microsoft Entra ID, they typically need a control plane role, like Reader, to see the resource in the portal, plus a data plane role, like Storage Blob Data Contributor, to actually manipulate the data. Question number 521. Now. Scenario. You are provisioning a new Azure storage account that will host multiple blob containers. For compliance reasons, one specific container must have its data encrypted at rest using a distinct customer-managed key, while all other containers will use the default Microsoft-managed keys at the storage account level. What must you configure on the storage account before creating this specific container? Options. Option A. A new set of rotated access keys. Option B. An encryption scope. Option C. A shared access signature, SAS, token. Option D. An advanced threat protection policy. The required response is Option B. An encryption scope. Here is the technical justification. Encryption scopes in Azure Storage allow you to manage encryption keys at the container or individual blob level. By creating an encryption scope, you can specify a different customer-managed key and then assign that scope to the specific container when it is created, isolating its encryption from the rest of the storage account. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. A. Rotating access keys affects account-level authentication, not granular data at rest encryption. C. A SAS token is an authorization mechanism used to grant time-limited access to resources. It has nothing to do with how the data is encrypted on disk. D. Advanced threat protection is a security feature that monitors for anomalous access patterns, not a mechanism for configuring encryption at rest. Exam tip. If a scenario requires different encryption keys for different containers or blobs within the exact same storage account, you must use encryption scopes. Review question number 522. Carefully. Begin by examining the scenario. You are reviewing this custom Azure RBAC role definition. Assume this is the only role assigned to the users. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Review Statement 1. Users assigned this role can assign Azure roles to other users. Review Statement 2. Users assigned this role can provision new virtual machines. Review Statement 3. Users assigned this role can configure a static private IP address on a virtual machine's network interface. The answer to Statement 1 is no. Role assignment creation requires Microsoft authorization/role assignments/right, which is absent. The answer to Statement 2 is yes. The compute, disk, NIC, subnet read, and subnet join permissions support VM provisioning. The answer to Statement 3 is yes. Microsoft network/network interfaces/ permits modification of the NIC IP configuration. Not action subtracts permissions from that role's actions. It is not an explicit deny that overrides permissions from another role assignment. Let us examine question number 523. Consider the following scenario. You manage an Azure App Service web app named Customer Portal. The application directory structure contains a specific folder named Temp Cache. You are tasked with configuring daily backups for Customer Portal. To optimize storage costs, you must ensure that the Temp Cache folder is completely excluded from the backup process. Select the appropriate options from the drop-down menus to complete the solution. For the first statement, to store the backup data, you must first create the blank. Select from an Azure storage account, a recovery services vault, a backup vault, or an Azure SQL database. For the second statement, to ensure Temp Cache is ignored during the backup process, you must create and configure the blank. Select from a backup policy, _backup.filter file, an app service lock, or a web job. The answer to the first statement is an Azure storage account. App Service custom backups write directly to an Azure Storage Blob container, not a recovery services vault. The answer to the second statement is _backup.filter file. The standard method to exclude app service directories from backups is the _backup.filter file. A useful examination rule is this. Unlike Azure virtual machines which use recovery services vaults, Azure App Service custom backups are saved directly to an Azure storage account, and exclusions are managed using _backup.filter file. Let us work through question number 525. This is marked as a medium question. Let us first review the situation. Your organization uses two Azure subscriptions. Subfinance is in Management Group MG Alpha and contains RG App 1 with VM FinApp. SubHR is in Management Group MG Beta and contains RG App 2 with VM HR App 1 and VM HR App 2. The following Azure RBAC assignments exist: User X, Virtual Machine Contributor on MG Alpha User X, Virtual Machine User Login on SubHR User E, Virtual Machine Contributor on MG Beta User E, Virtual Machine User Login on VM FinApp. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. User X can sign in to the operating system of VM FinApp using Microsoft Entra credentials. Statement 2. User E can restart and resize VM FinApp. Statement 3. User E can create a snapshot of a managed disk attached to VM HR App 1. Statement 1 should be marked no. Virtual Machine Contributor manages the Azure VM resource but does not grant guest sign-in. User X's login role applies only to SubHR. Statement 2 should be marked no. Virtual Machine User Login permits guest sign-in but not control plane actions such as restart or resize. Statement 3 should be marked yes. Virtual Machine Contributor assigned at MG Beta is inherited by SubHR and its VM resources, including managed disk snapshot operations. Keep this examination point in mind. Azure RBAC inheritance flows downward. Permissions assigned to a child resource do not flow upward to its resource group or subscription. We will now analyze question number 526. Review the scenario carefully. You are configuring a route-based site-to-site VPN between an on-premises VPN device and Azure. The Azure VPN gateway might use either the basic route-based SKU or a current VPN GW route-based SKU. You need to choose one IKE version that is supported by both gateway categories. Which protocol should you configure? Compare the following options. Option A is PPTP. Option B is IKF2. Option C is L2TP. Option D is IKF1. In this case, select option B, IKF2. This is correct because IKF2 is supported by the basic route-based VPN gateway and by current VPN GW route-based gateway SKUs, so it satisfies the compatibility requirement across both categories. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because A. PPTP is not the IKE/IPsec protocol used for Azure site-to-site VPN connections. C. L2TP is not the required IKE version for an Azure site-to-site VPN gateway. D. Current VPN GW route-based SKUs can support IKF1, but the basic route-based SKU supports IKF2 only, so IKF1 does not meet the stated compatibility requirement. Remember this distinction for the exam. Do not assume all route-based gateways are IKF2 only, check the gateway SKU and choose a protocol supported at both ends. Next, question number 527. We are moving to monitor alerts. You manage several Windows Server virtual machines in Azure. You need an Azure Monitor alert when the average guest operating system processor utilization across the machines exceeds 85%. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? Review the items to be ordered. Entry 1. Create an alert rule in Azure Monitor based on the collected performance data. Entry 2. Install the Azure Monitor agent on the virtual machines and create and associate a data collection rule that sends processor performance counters to the workspace. Entry 3. Create an Azure SQL database. Entry 4. Create a log analytics workspace. Here is the proper order. In position 1, create a log analytics workspace. In position 2, install the Azure Monitor agent on the virtual machines and create and associate a data collection rule that sends processor performance counters to the workspace. In position 3, create an alert rule in Azure Monitor based on the collected performance data. Guest OS performance counters must first be collected by the Azure Monitor agent under a data collection rule and sent to log analytics. After data is available, a log search alert can evaluate the records and trigger at the required threshold. The key takeaway is guest OS counters require an agent and a data collection rule. Platform metrics can often be alerted on directly without log analytics. Let us examine question number 528. Consider the following scenario. You manage these Azure resources: VMweb, Windows Virtual Machine Storage Data, Storage Account DB Primary, Azure SQL Database Log Hub, Log Analytics Workspace. You are creating a data collection rule specifically for the Azure Monitor agent to collect Windows performance counters from a monitored machine and send them to Log Analytics. Select the appropriate options for this data collection rule. Complete each statement by selecting the appropriate value. Review Statement 1. The resource that can be associated with this rule as the monitored source is the blank. Choose between VMweb only, VMweb and storage data only, VMweb, storage data, and DB primary, or VMweb, storage data, DB primary, and Log Hub. Review Statement 2. The resource that can be configured as the destination is the blank. Choose between Log Hub only, storage data only, Log Hub and storage data only, or Log Hub, storage data, and DB primary. The correct value for Statement 1 is VMweb only. The Azure Monitor agent runs on the virtual machine and applies the associated rule. The correct value for Statement 2 is Log Hub only. This rule sends the collected performance counters to the Log Analytics workspace. Exam tip. DCR capabilities vary by data collection scenario. Identify the DCR kind, data source, and supported destination before selecting resources. Now consider question number 529. Next, we enter the topic of access interpretation. Scenario. You are analyzing an Azure Role-Based Access Control (RBAC) implementation for your subscription. You extract the following active role assignments. User Alpha, assign the owner role at the subscription scope. User Beta, assign the owner role at the RG Backend Resource Group scope. User Gamma, assign the owner role at the VM Database Virtual Machine scope, which is located inside RG Frontend. User Delta, assign the contributor role at the RG Frontend Resource Group scope. Select the appropriate options from the drop-down menus to complete the statements accurately based on the role assignments. The first statement reads, the user explicitly assigned the owner role precisely for the VM database resource is the blank. The options for this statement are user alpha, user gamma, user beta, and user gamma, or user alpha, user gamma, and user delta. The second statement reads, the users who have sufficient permissions to create a brand new virtual machine inside the RG Frontend Resource Group are the blank. The options for this statement are user alpha and user delta, user alpha, user beta, and user gamma, user alpha, user gamma, and user delta, or user alpha, user beta, user gamma, and user delta. For statement 1, select user gamma. User gamma scope is strictly tied to the VM database resource. For statement 2, select user alpha and user delta. User alpha inherits owner rights to the RG, and user delta is a contributor directly on the RG. RBAC permissions flow downward. A user with owner rights on a specific VM cannot manage the resource group it resides in, whereas a user with contributor rights on a resource group can manage all virtual machines within it. Question number 530. Consider this scenario. VNet Hub contains an Azure VPN gateway configured for point-to-site connectivity. A developer connects successfully and can access VNet Hub. You then peer VNet Hub with VNet Spoke. On the hub-to-spoke peering, allow gateway transit is enabled. On the spoke-to-hub peering, use the remote virtual networks gateway is enabled. Virtual machines in both virtual networks can communicate, but the developer's already installed VPN profile cannot reach VNet Spoke. What is the most immediate action required on the developer's computer? Review the options. Choice A, enable BGP on the VPN gateway. Choice B, download and install an updated point-to-site VPN client configuration package. Choice C, enable use the remote virtual networks gateway on VNet Spoke. Choice D, configure a NAT gateway on VNet Spoke. The best answer is option B, download and install an updated point-to-site VPN client configuration package. The requirement is satisfied because the peering and gateway transit settings are already correct. The point-to-site client profile must be regenerated and reinstalled so the client receives routes for the newly reachable spoke address space. The alternatives can be eliminated because A, BGP is not required merely to refresh the route set delivered to this point-to-site client. C, the scenario states that the spoke already uses the remote hub gateway. D, a NAT gateway provides subnet outbound internet connectivity and does not add the spoke route to the VPN client. A useful examination rule is this. After changing a point-to-site topology or reachable address space, regenerate and redistribute the VPN client profile when client routes must change. Proceed to question number 531. This question moves us into Azure Monitor logs. Your organization manages 10 distinct Azure subscriptions, all associated with a single Microsoft Entra ID tenant. You are tasked with centrally aggregating and monitoring administrative user activity, such as resource creation, deletion, and role assignments, across all 10 subscriptions simultaneously. Which Azure service or feature should you use to fulfill this requirement? Available choices. Choice A, Azure Application Insights. Choice B, Microsoft Entra Access Reviews. Choice C, a Log Analytics Workspace. Choice D, Activity Log Filters in the Azure Portal. The appropriate choice is option C, a Log Analytics Workspace. The reasoning is as follows. Administrative activities within Azure, such as deploying resources or altering configurations, are recorded in the Azure Activity Log. By default, activity logs are retained per subscription. To centrally monitor and query activity across multiple subscriptions, you must configure the activity log diagnostic settings in each subscription to forward their logs to a single, centralized log analytics workspace. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Application Insights is an application performance management (APM) service used to monitor the internal code execution and performance of web applications, not control plane Azure administrative activity. B. Access Reviews are an identity governance feature used to periodically verify if users still require specific roles or group memberships, not a real-time monitoring tool for deployment activity. D. While you can filter activity logs in the portal, doing so requires manually switching contexts between 10 subscriptions or creating complex cross-subscription views, which is not an effective way to centrally aggregate and query data long-term. Keep this examination point in mind. To aggregate activity logs, control plane actions, or resource logs, data plane actions, across multiple Azure resources or subscriptions, always route them to a central log analytics workspace. Question number 532. You manage one virtual network with 3 virtual machines, VMweb 10.0.1.4, VMapp 10.0.2.4, and VMDB 10.0.3.4, each in a separate subnet. NSG Web is associated with the VMweb subnet and allows inbound RDP from any. NSG App is associated with the VMapp subnet and denies inbound RDP from 10.0.1.0/24. NSGDB is associated with the VMDB subnet and contains only default rules. All NSGs retain the default allow VNet inbound and allow VNet outbound rules. The guest operating system firewalls permit the tested traffic. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement is, the NSGs permit an RDP session from VMweb to VMapp. The second statement is, the NSGs permit ICMP traffic from VMapp to VMDB. The third statement is, the NSGs permit an RDP session from VMapp to VMDB. Statement 1. The answer is no. NSG App explicitly denies inbound TCP 3389 from the VMweb subnet, and the custom deny takes priority over the default VNet allow. Statement 2. The answer is yes. No custom rule blocks ICMP to VMDB, so the default allow VNet inbound rule permits it. Statement 3. The answer is yes. No custom rule blocks TCP 3389 to VMDB, so the default VNet allow rules permit the flow. Remember this distinction for the exam. NSGs are stateful and include default VNet allow rules, but a higher priority custom deny overrides a default allow. Apply precise reasoning to question number 533. The difficulty level here is medium. Analyze the scenario before evaluating the choices. Your company utilizes several Azure storage accounts containing Azure file shares to store critical internal documents. You have a Microsoft Entra ID group named Compliance Auditors. You are instructed to grant this group read-only access to the file shares using standard Azure RBAC, role-based access control, assignments, allowing them to mount the shares via SMB. Before you can assign the necessary Azure RBAC roles for SMB access, what must you do first? Compare every choice before deciding. Next, option A, enable identity-based access on the storage accounts. Next, option B, upgrade the storage accounts to the premium performance tier. Next, option C, generate a shared access signature, SAS, token for each file share. Next, option D, recreate the storage accounts with hierarchical namespace enabled. The correct answer is option A, enable identity-based access on the storage accounts. The key reason is Azure Files SMB authorization through Azure RBAC requires a supported directory service to be configured for identity-based authentication on each storage account. After that prerequisite is enabled, a share-level data role such as storage file data SMB share reader can be assigned to the group. The remaining options are incorrect because B, standard Azure file shares support identity-based SMB access, Premium is not a prerequisite. C. A SAS token is a separate delegated authorization mechanism and does not enable identity-based SMB authentication. D. Hierarchical namespace applies to Azure Data Lake Storage Generation 2 blobs, not Azure Files SMB identity. The key takeaway is configure the Azure Files identity source first, then assign the appropriate storage file data SMB share role at the required scope. Now consider question number 534. Consider this scenario. You enabled Network Watcher for the Central US region and need to create a virtual network flow log for VNet app, which is also in Central US. The flow log records must be written to an Azure storage account. Which storage account is supported for this configuration? Option A. A standard general-purpose V2 storage account in Central US. Option B. A premium blob storage account in Central US. Option C. A standard general-purpose V2 storage account in East US. Option D. A premium file storage account in Central US. The required response is option A. A standard general-purpose V2 storage account in Central US. Here is the technical justification. Virtual network flow logs require a supported standard Azure storage account in the same region as the virtual network. A standard general-purpose V2 account in Central US meets both requirements. B. Premium blob storage accounts are not supported as the flow log storage destination. C. The account is standard but is not in the same region as the Central US virtual network. D. Premium file storage accounts are not supported for virtual network flow log storage. Exam tip. Use virtual network flow logs for new deployments. Creation of new NSG flow logs was disabled after June 30, 2025. We will now analyze question number 535. The focus now shifts to Azure Load Balancer. Review the scenario carefully. You are configuring an Azure standard load balancer named AppLB. Its front-end IP configuration is connected to AppVNet. You want to add the network interfaces of Web Server 1 and Web Server 2 to an IP-based backend pool. What network requirement must the virtual machines meet? Choose from the following options. Choice A. Both virtual machines must be connected to AppVNet. Choice B. Both virtual machines must be in the same availability set. Choice C. Both virtual machines must be in the same availability zone. Choice D. Both virtual machines must have public IP addresses. In this case, select option A. Both virtual machines must be connected to AppVNet. This is correct because for a regional Azure load balancer with an IP-based backend pool, backend IP configurations must belong to the same virtual network as the load balancer frontend. Both virtual machines must therefore be connected to AppVNet. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Backend members do not have to be in the same availability set. C. A zone-redundant standard load balancer can distribute traffic to backends in different availability zones. D. Backend virtual machines can use private IP addresses and do not require public IP addresses. Availability sets and zones improve resiliency, but backend pool eligibility is controlled by the load balancer's networking scope. Review question number 536. Carefully. Begin by examining the scenario. An Azure virtual machine named SQLVM has 3 managed disks: OS disk, data disk, and temp disk. You must use Azure Backup to protect OS disk and data disk while excluding temp disk. Which 3 actions should you perform in sequence? The available items are: the first available item is create an Azure Backup vault. The second available item is enable backup for SQLVM and configure selective disk backup to include data disk. The third available item is create a recovery services vault. The fourth available item is create an Azure VM backup policy. The correct sequence is as follows. First, create a recovery services vault. Second, create an Azure VM backup policy. Third, enable backup for SQL-VM and configure selective disk backup to include data disk. Azure VM Backup uses a recovery services vault. After creating a VM backup policy, enable protection for SQL-VM and use selective disk backup to include data disk. The operating system disk is always included and temp disk can be excluded. A useful examination rule is this. In Azure VM Selective Disk Backup, the OS disk is always protected. Selection controls which data disks are included or excluded. The next item is question number 537. Review the situation. You monitor an Azure App Service application named Storefront App. Management requires a scheduled synthetic transaction that signs in, adds an item to a cart, and proceeds to check out from multiple locations. A test script will perform the multi-step transaction and send its availability results to Azure Monitor. Which Azure Monitor feature should store, analyze, and alert on the custom availability test results? Choice A. Application Insights Custom Availability Tests. Choice B. Azure Service Health. Choice C. Azure Diagnostic Settings. Choice D. Network Watcher Connection Monitor. The correct answer is option A. Application Insights Custom Availability Tests. The requirement is satisfied because Application Insights supports custom availability tests whose external test code sends availability telemetry. This approach can represent a multi-step transaction and enables availability analysis and alerting from the Application Insights resource. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because B. Service Health reports Azure Platform incidents and planned maintenance. It does not execute application transactions. C. Diagnostic settings route existing logs and metrics but do not run or evaluate a scripted synthetic transaction. D. Connection monitor tests network reachability and latency, not application sign-in, cart, and checkout behavior. Keep this examination point in mind. Standard URL ping tests are single-step. Use a custom availability test when the synthetic scenario requires scripted multi-step behavior. Proceed to question number 538. Scenario. You manage an Azure virtual machine named AppServer protected by a recovery services vault. The backup policy retains instant recovery snapshots for 3 days and standard vault backups for 30 days. Due to a catastrophic application failure today, you must restore AppServer to a state from exactly 10 days ago. The recovery must introduce the absolute minimum amount of downtime, ideally allowing the broken VM to remain online processing partial requests while the replacement is being prepared. What is the most appropriate action to initiate this restore process? Available choices. Option A. Restore the virtual machine using the Create New Restore configuration option. Option B. Restore the virtual machine using the Replace Existing Restore configuration option. Option C. Deallocate AppServer manually before initiating the restore. Option D. Delete AppServer and its associated network interfaces. The best answer is option A. Restore the virtual machine using the Create New Restore configuration option. The reasoning is as follows. The goal is to minimize downtime for the currently running, albeit partially broken, application. By choosing the Create New Virtual Machine Restore option, Azure Backup provisions a completely new VM from the 10-day-old backup in the background. The original VM remains online during this entire process. Once the new VM is fully provisioned and tested, you can instantly redirect traffic, via DNS or a load balancer, to the new VM, resulting in near-zero downtime. The alternatives can be eliminated because B. Using Replace Existing replaces the disks of the live VM. Azure Backup forces the existing VM to shut down, deallocate, before the disk swap can occur. Because the restore point is 10 days old, it relies on the vault tier, slower, rather than the instant snapshot tier. The VM would be offline for the duration of the data transfer. C. Deallocating the VM immediately causes a total outage, violating the requirement to minimize downtime. D. Deleting the VM immediately causes a total outage and destroys diagnostic data that might be needed. Remember this distinction for the exam. To minimize downtime during a vault tier VM recovery, restore the backup as a new VM or as detached disks while the original VM remains online. Once the restore completes, swap the network traffic to the newly restored instance. Let us work through question number 540. Next, we enter the topic of virtual machines. Let us first review the situation. Core VNet and a virtual machine named VM-AppCore are deployed in East US. VM-AppCore has NIC1 connected to Core VNet. You need a second network interface for the virtual machine. You create NIC2 in West US and attempt to connect it to a subnet in Core VNet. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Creating NIC2 in West US and connecting it to Core VNet in East US meets the requirement. For the first statement, choose no. The VM, NIC, and connected virtual network must be regionally compatible. The key takeaway is AVM's attached NICs must be in the same virtual network and region as the VM. The VM size must also support the required NIC count. Proceed to question number 541. Consider this scenario. You are designing an Azure backup strategy for your environment. Your resources are distributed as follows: 10 virtual machines located in the Central US region, 5 virtual machines located in the East US region, 2 Azure file shares located in the Central US region. The business requirements dictate all virtual machines in both regions must be backed up daily at 2 a.m. with a retention period of 30 days. Both Azure file shares must be backed up daily at 8 p.m. with a retention period of 90 days. Select the appropriate options from the drop-down menus to determine the minimum number of resources required. Statement 1. The minimum number of recovery services vaults you must create is the blank. The available choices are 1, 2, 3, or 4. Statement 2. The minimum number of backup policies you must create is the blank. The available choices are 1, 2, 3, or 4. Statement 1 should be completed with 2. Recovery services vaults are strictly bound to a single region. Resources in Central US and East US require separate vaults. Statement 2 should be completed with 3. Policies are vault-specific and workload-specific. You need a VM policy in Vault A, a VM policy in Vault B, and a file share policy in Vault A. Exam tip. Recovery services vaults cannot cross regions. Backup policies cannot cross vaults, nor can they span different workload types. For example, you cannot use a VM backup policy to back up an Azure file share. Review question number 542. Carefully. Review the scenario carefully. You administer the Microsoft Entra tenant Contoso.com. A partner provides a CSV file containing 250 consultants who require guest accounts. You download the Microsoft Entra bulk invitation template, populate the required fields, and upload it by using bulk invite users. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement is, using the Microsoft Entra bulk invite users operation with a completed CSV file meets the requirement. For the first statement, choose yes. The bulk invitation workflow creates the guest objects and sends or prepares their invitations from the uploaded template. Use bulk create for member users and bulk invite users for external guests. Both workflows use Microsoft-provided CSV templates. Now consider question number 543. An Azure App Service web app named Internal Portal already has its deployment authentication method configured. A development team must deploy application code and manage the web app's content and configuration. The team must not manage the app service plan or Azure role assignments. You will assign one built-in Azure RBAC role at the web app scope. Which role provides the required access with the least privilege? The options are: Choice A, Owner; Choice B, Contributor; Choice C, Website Contributor; Choice D, Reader. The appropriate choice is option C, Website Contributor. The key reason is website contributor grants management permissions for app service websites, including deployment and site configuration, without granting role assignment management or broad ownership of the surrounding resources. Assigning it at the web app scope limits the access to internal portal. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. Owner includes role assignment management and is substantially broader than required. B. Contributor grants broad resource management permissions beyond the website-specific requirement. D. Reader cannot deploy content or modify the web app. A useful examination rule is this. Separate deployment authentication from Azure RBAC. The deployment method must be configured, and the user's role must authorize management of the target web app. Question number 544. Requires careful analysis. Identify the decisive requirement in this scenario. Your organization uses both Azure RBAC roles and Microsoft Entra roles. Custom Ops role is a custom Azure RBAC role at subscription scope. Custom ID role is a custom Microsoft Entra role in the tenant. You use the Azure portal to create new sub-role, a custom Azure RBAC role. New admin role, a custom Microsoft Entra role. Select the role sources that the respective portal creation workflows can clone. Review each blank and choose the most appropriate option. For the first statement, to create new sub-role, you can choose to clone the blank. Choose between built-in Azure RBAC roles only, Custom Ops role only, Custom Ops role and built-in Azure RBAC roles, or Custom Ops role, Custom ID role, and all built-in roles. For the second statement, to create new admin role, you can choose to clone the blank. Choose between built-in Microsoft Entra roles only, Custom ID role only, Custom ID role and built-in Microsoft Entra roles, or Custom Ops role, Custom ID role, and all built-in roles. Statement 1 should be completed with Custom Ops role and built-in Azure RBAC roles. Azure RBAC custom roles can be cloned from existing Azure RBAC built-in or custom roles. Statement 2 should be completed with Custom ID role only. The Microsoft Entra workflow can clone the existing custom directory role, not a built-in role or an Azure RBAC role. Keep this examination point in mind. Azure RBAC custom roles and Microsoft Entra custom roles are separate role systems with different permissions and creation workflows. Let us examine question number 545. Consider the following scenario. Your Microsoft Entra ID tenant includes a hierarchical group structure. Group A contains user 1. Group B is a member of Group A and contains user 2. Group C is a member of Group B and contains user 3. User 4 does not belong to any groups. You navigate to the Microsoft Entra portal and assign an Enterprise Mobility Plus Security E5 license to Group A. You also directly assign the same license to user 4. Which users will successfully inherit or receive the license based on this configuration? Now examine the possible answers. Choice A, user 1, user 2, user 3, and user 4. Choice B, user 1 and user 4 only. Choice C, user 4 only. Choice D, user 1, user 2, and user 4 only. The correct answer is option B, user 1 and user 4 only. Here is the technical justification. Microsoft Entra ID group-based licensing applies exclusively to direct members of the assigned group. It does not support nested groups. Because Group A was assigned the license, only its direct member, user 1, receives it. User 2 and user 3 are members of nested groups, Group B and Group C, so they do not inherit the license. User 4 receives the license because it was directly assigned to their individual account. The remaining options are incorrect because A. This assumes licenses flow down through nested groups, which is a common misconception. Group-based licensing does not support nesting. C. This ignores the fact that Group A was successfully assigned the license, which grants it to user 1. D. This incorrectly assumes one level of nesting, Group B, might work, but Entra ID strictly ignores all nested group memberships for licensing. Remember this distinction for the exam. Always remember that group-based license assignments in Microsoft Entra ID do not cascade to nested groups. Only direct users, or service principals, in the assigned group receive the license. Let us work through question number 547. Begin by examining the scenario. Your organization possesses 10 terabytes of historical video archives stored on physical hard drives in an on-premises data center. You plan to utilize the Azure Import-Export service to ship these physical drives to a Microsoft data center to transfer the data into your Azure subscription. Which Azure service is a supported destination for the data transferred via an Azure import job? Review each available choice. Option A is Azure SQL Database. Option B is Azure Cosmos DB. Option C is Azure Blob Storage. Option D is Azure Virtual Machine Managed Disks. The required response is option C, Azure Blob Storage. This is correct because the Azure Import-Export service is specifically designed to securely transfer large amounts of data to and from Azure Blob Storage or Azure File Storage by shipping physical disk drives to Microsoft data centers. A and B, Azure Import-Export operates at the raw file/blob level and cannot import data directly into structured relational, SQL, or NoSQL, Cosmos DB, database engines. D. You cannot use the import-export service to write data directly into the blocks of an attached virtual machine managed disk. The key takeaway is the Azure Import-Export service supports exactly two destinations, Azure Blob Storage and Azure Files. For transferring data to other services, you must import it to blob/files first, then use tools like Azure Data Factory to move it. We will now analyze question number 548. The focus now shifts to App Service Backup. Let us first review the situation. You have an Azure subscription containing an app service web app named Customer Portal. You need to configure custom scheduled backups for Customer Portal. You have 4 existing storage accounts available to use as the backup destination: SA Data 1, Storage v2, Standard Tier, SA Data 2, Blob Storage, Standard Tier, SA Data 3, Blob Storage, Premium Tier, SA Data 4, File Storage, Premium Tier. To minimize operational costs and ensure compatibility, you must select the correct storage account. Which storage account should you configure as the target for the app service backup? Compare the following options. Choice A, SA Data 1. Choice B, SA Data 2. Choice C, SA Data 3. Choice D, SA Data 4. In this case, select option A, SA Data 1. Custom backups for Azure App Service require a storage account to store the resulting zip archives. The App Service Backup feature explicitly requires a standard tier storage account. Furthermore, it requires a General Purpose v1 or General Purpose v2, Storage v2, account. It does not support the legacy blob storage account kind, nor does it support any premium tier accounts. Therefore, SA Data 1, Storage v2, Standard, is the only compatible option. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. B. Blob storage is a legacy account kind that is not supported for app service backups. C. Blob storage is a premium performance tier, which is unsupported for app service backups. D. File storage is a premium performance tier for Azure Files, which is unsupported for app service backups. Exam tip. When configuring app service backups, the target storage account must be a standard tier General Purpose v1 or v2, Storage v2, account. Premium storage accounts and blob-only accounts are not supported. We will now analyze question number 549. Let us first review the situation. A log analytics workspace named Central Logs receives Windows events in the event table. You need to return only records whose event severity is error. Which Custo query language, KQL, query should you run? Review each available choice. Option A is event, where event level name equals error. Option B is select asterisk from event where event level name equals error. Option C is get event where object, $_event level name EQ error. Option D is event search error. The best answer is option A, event where event level name equals error. The requirement is satisfied because the event table uses event level name for the textual severity. KQL starts with the table and uses the where operator with equals equals to return only rows whose severity equals error. The other choices do not satisfy the requirement because B. This is SQL syntax, not KQL. C. This is PowerShell syntax, not a log analytics query. D. Search looks for the term across searchable columns and does not specifically require event level name to equal error. Use the schema browser to confirm the table and column names before writing a KQL filter. The next key item is question number 550. The central scenario is as follows. Application servers in VNet front access an Azure storage account and Microsoft Entra ID. You plan to enable virtual network service endpoints on the application subnet wherever the target service natively supports them. How many service endpoints can you configure for these two services, and which endpoint is it? Focus on the distinction between these options. Option A 1, Microsoft Storage. Option B 2, Microsoft Storage and Microsoft.Azure Active Directory. Option C 1, Microsoft.Azure Active Directory. Option D 0, neither service supports service endpoints. The appropriate choice is option A 1, Microsoft Storage. The reasoning is as follows. Azure Storage supports the Microsoft Storage Virtual Network Service endpoint. Microsoft Entra ID itself does not provide a general-purpose service endpoint for authentication traffic, so only one endpoint from the listed services can be enabled. The alternatives can be eliminated because B. Microsoft.Azure Active Directory is not a general Microsoft Entra authentication service endpoint. Its historical use is specific to Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 1. C. Microsoft Entra ID is not the supported service in this pair, while Azure Storage is. D. Azure Storage supports Microsoft Storage Service endpoints. A useful examination rule is this. Service endpoints are service-specific. Microsoft.Azure Active Directory should not be treated as a general endpoint for Microsoft Entra sign-in traffic. Let us work through question number 551. Consider the following scenario. An Azure App Service web app uses the default hostname shopapp.azurewebsites.net. You own tailspintoys.com and want to map the subdomain www.tailspintoys.com. The portal provides a domain verification ID. You must verify ownership before changing the DNS record that carries live traffic. Which DNS record should you create for pre-verification? Now examine the possible answers. Option A is a name record named www pointing to shopapp.azurewebsites.net. Option B is a TXT record named azure.www containing the domain verification ID. Option C is an A record named www pointing to the web app's inbound IP address. Option D is a TXT record named www containing shopapp.azurewebsites.net. The correct answer is option B. A TXT record named azure.www containing the domain verification ID. The key reason is for a subdomain, app service supports pre-verification by using a TXT record named Azure subdomain. Setting azure.www to the domain verification ID proves ownership without changing the name or a record that routes live traffic. Now consider why the remaining options are unsuitable. A. The name maps the hostname to the app and changes live traffic rather than only pre-verifying ownership. C. The A record changes traffic routing and does not provide the requested silent pre-verification. D. The TXT value must be the app service domain verification ID, not the default app hostname. Keep this examination point in mind. Use Azure for a root domain and Azure subdomain for a subdomain when pre-verifying an app service custom domain. Question number 552. Review the situation. Your Azure environment includes a virtual network protected by a network security group, NSG, named NSG Secure. To comply with internal security policies, you have created a high-priority outbound rule in NSG Secure that explicitly blocks all outbound traffic to the internet. You recently deployed an Azure Key Vault. The virtual machines inside the protected virtual network must securely retrieve secrets from this key vault. You need to add a new outbound allow rule to NSG Secure specifically for the key vault traffic. To ensure the rule follows the principle of least privilege and requires minimal ongoing maintenance, what should you set as the destination for the new allow rule? Review the options. Option A. An IP address range representing all possible key vault IPs. Option B. An application security group, ASG. Option C. The Azure Key Vault Service Tag. Option D. The Azure Cloud Service Tag. The required response is option C. The Azure Key Vault Service Tag. Here is the technical justification. Service tags are Microsoft-managed groups of IP address prefixes associated with specific Azure services. By selecting the Azure Key Vault Service Tag as the destination, the NSG rule automatically allows traffic to all valid Key Vault IP addresses without granting broader Internet access. Microsoft updates the underlying IPs automatically, requiring zero maintenance from the administrator. The remaining options are incorrect because A. Azure PaaS IPs can change frequently. Manually managing an IP address range is highly error-prone and requires constant administrative effort, violating the scenario's requirements. B. Application security groups, ASGs, are used to group internal virtual machine network interfaces, NICs, within your own VNet. They cannot be used to represent external Azure PaaS services like Key Vault. D. The Azure Cloud Service Tag includes the IP ranges for all Azure Data Center public IPs across all services. While it would allow access to the Key Vault, it is far too broad and violates the principle of least privilege. Remember this distinction for the exam. When configuring NSG rules to communicate with specific Azure PaaS resources, like storage, Key Vault, or SQL, always use the specific service tag, for example, Azure Key Vault, to minimize maintenance and adhere to least privilege. The next item is question number 553. Scenario. An app service web app named Public Portal uses regional VNet integration with a dedicated subnet in VNet Core. An Azure firewall is deployed in the virtual network. All internet-bound traffic from the web app must traverse the firewall for inspection. Which configuration should you implement? Available choices. Option A. Enable outbound VNet routing for all traffic on the web app, and associate the integration subnet with a route table containing a 0.0.0.0/0 route whose next hop is the Azure firewall. Option B. Upgrade the standard app service plan to premium and assign a public IP address to the app. Option C. Configure a hybrid connection to the Azure firewall. Option D. Use Network Watcher Connection Monitor to redirect outbound traffic. The appropriate choice is option A. Enable outbound VNet routing for all traffic on the web app, and associate the integration subnet with a route table containing a 0.0.0.0/0 route whose next hop is the Azure firewall. This is correct because regional VNet integration must route internet traffic into the integration subnet, and the subnet must have a user-defined default route to the firewall. Enabling all traffic outbound VNet routing and applying the 0.0.0.0/0 UDR implements the required force tunneling path. B. The standard plan supports regional VNet integration. Upgrading and assigning a public IP does not force outbound traffic through the firewall. C. Hybrid connections provide application-level connectivity to specific endpoints and do not implement subnet routing through Azure Firewall. D. Connection Monitor observes connectivity but cannot redirect traffic. The key takeaway is for app service force tunneling, configure both outbound VNet routing and the integration subnet UDR, either setting alone is insufficient. Review question number 554. Carefully. This is a medium-level challenge. Review the scenario carefully. You must assign least privilege Azure RBAC access. Alice must browse storage accounts in the portal and read blob data, but must not modify resources or blobs. Bob must assign only the contributor role to users on specified storage accounts and must not receive data access. Match each user to the most appropriate assignment. Each assignment may be used once, more than once, or not at all. The first set contains left side entry 1. Alice Bob. Choose matches from the following right side entries. Right option A owner. Right option B, reader plus storage blob data reader. Right option C, contributor. Right option D, role-based access control administrator with a condition that limits role assignments to contributor on the target storage accounts. The correct pairings are: left item 1, Alice, pairs with B, reader plus storage blob data reader. Left item 2, Bob, pairs with D, role-based access control administrator with a condition that limits role assignments to contributor on the target storage accounts. Alice needs reader for control plane discovery and storage blob data reader for read-only blob data access. Bob needs role assignment permissions, role-based access control administrator at the target scope, constrained so only contributor can be assigned, provides less privilege than owner. Exam tip: portal visibility and storage data access use separate control plane and data plane roles. Role assignment delegation can be restricted with conditions. Let us examine question number 555. Begin by examining the scenario. You review this ARM template resource. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Review statement 1. An administrator can use blob point-in-time restore for a restore point up to 7 days in the past. Review statement 2. The storage account firewall limits access to clients physically located in East US. Review statement 3. The storage account uses 3 synchronous copies within a single data center in the primary region. Statement 1. The answer is yes. Versioning, change feed, soft delete for 8 days, and a 7-day restore policy satisfy the point-in-time restore prerequisites. Statement 2. The answer is no, network ACLS. Default action is allow, so the firewall does not restrict access by client location. Statement 3. The answer is yes. Standard_LRS stores 3 synchronous copies in one data center in the selected region. Blob point-in-time restore requires versioning, change feed, and blob soft delete. The restore period must be shorter than the soft delete retention period. Proceed to question number 556. This is a harder question, so check every requirement carefully. Scenario. You deploy this ARM template to a resource group. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The deployment creates exactly 4 storage accounts. Statement 2. The storage accounts are deployed in Central US. Statement 3. The first storage account name begins with store 0. The answer to statement 1 is no. Copy.count is 3, so the resource loop creates 3 storage accounts. The answer to statement 2 is yes. The resource uses resource group, .location, and RG data is in centralist. The declared location parameter is unused. The answer to statement 3 is yes. Copy index starts at 0 unless an offset is supplied. A useful examination rule is this. Trace the expressions actually referenced by each ARM resource. An unused parameter has no effect, and copy index is 0 based by default. Question number 557. Your organization mandates that all sensitive data residing in Azure Blob Storage must be encrypted at rest using customer-managed keys, CMK, stored in an Azure Key Vault. You are configuring the encryption settings for a new storage account. You navigate to the Azure Key Vault to generate the necessary encryption key. Which key type and size are supported by Azure Storage for customer-managed key, CMK, encryption? Review the options. Choice A. An EC, elliptic curve, key using the P384 curve. Choice B. An RSA key with a size of 2048, 3072, or 4096 bits. Choice C. An EC, elliptic curve, key using the P521 curve. Choice D. An RSA key with a size of exactly 1024 bits only. In this case, select option B. An RSA key with a size of 2048, 3072, or 4096 bits. The requirement is satisfied because Azure Storage Encryption using Customer Managed Keys, CMK, strictly requires an RSA or RSAHSM key. The supported key sizes for this integration are 2048, 3072, and 4096 bits. The incorrect choices fail for the following reasons. A and C. While Azure Key Vault itself can generate and store elliptic curve (EC) keys for other cryptographic purposes, Azure Storage does not currently support EC keys for CMK encryption at rest. D. RSA keys with a 1024-bit size are considered cryptographically weak and are not supported for Azure Storage CMK. Keep this examination point in mind. For Azure Storage Customer Managed Keys, CMK, you must use an RSA key of at least 2048 bits stored in an Azure Key Vault. Elliptic curve (AC) keys are not supported for this specific service integration. You have completed Part 13 of the AZ-104 Microsoft Azure Administrator Exam Practice Series. Keep building your Azure administration skills by opening the complete playlist and continuing with the remaining parts in sequence. If this session helped your preparation, like the video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more certification exam practice content. Share your score, doubts, or feedback in the comments. I would be happy to hear how your preparation is going. Thank you for learning with Tech with Kaushik. Keep practicing, and I will see you in the next part.